Really?
Kentucky woodlands are a major target for three reasons. They have valuable hardwoods. Those hardwoods, those forests are made up of a bunch of small, privately owned tracts. And a lot of the owners are elderly, or they're ill, or they live away from their tracts, and so they're not able to monitor their land easily. The result of that is that a lot of them become victims. You have a map in your handout, a page that has two maps on it. The top map is basically the woodland distribution across Kentucky, and if you look at that map, you would say to yourself, oh, this is an eastern Kentucky problem. But it actually is not an eastern Kentucky problem, because if you look at the bottom map, you will notice that 110 of 120 counties in Kentucky have woodland owners, and a lot of them are absentee owners, and that's what you're seeing here. So probably everybody on this committee has at least one constituent who is a absentee woodland owner, and you might have 100 or more constituents here. So it's a much wider problem than you might think just by looking at the distribution of woodlands. In fact, if you look at the Golden Triangle, you'll see that the Louisville, Northern Kentucky, Lexington area is practically black because they have so many absentee owners of woodlands in other places in Kentucky. So they're victims all over Kentucky. And if you are a victim, one of your first reactions is to call forestry, the Division of Forestry in Kentucky. And when you do that, you will discover that A, they're very aware of the problem, B, they're extremely sympathetic to you for being a victim, and C, they're absolutely powerless to do anything for you. Their only charter, basically, for logging at least, is to enforce clean water provisions. That means keeping silt out of our streams. They have nothing to do with enforcing laws against illegal logging. The only thing that forestry can offer a victim is if your logging thief did not put in water bars on steep roads and didn't sow grass, cheapest grass that he could get on that, then they can cite him and he may be fined, and if the offense is bad enough, he might go on what's called a bad actors list for loggers. But the only thing that can get you on that bad actors list is clean water violation. A logger can go out and commit felony theft of timber 5 years in a row, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he will never get on the bad actors list because he can't. It's just not set up to do that. So there is really no help for you if you go to the Department of Forestry. So the next thing you probably will do, or maybe it was the first thing, is your instinct will be to call the authorities. And when you do, you will discover that it is extremely rare in the Commonwealth of Kentucky to get law enforcement to investigate logging theft or to get a Commonwealth attorney to prosecute logging theft. You're almost invariably told, go civil, go file a civil case. Never mind that you have a felony theft in hand here. And this is pretty ironic because if somebody stole $10,000 of cash from you, or if they stole $10,000 worth of copper from a telephone company, or if they stole a car from you, there'd be no question about investigating it criminally and potentially prosecuting it. But logging theft is just regarded differently. It's sort of regarded as not really theft. And so you really have a tough time. You are a rare person who can get authorities to investigate and prosecute logging theft, no matter what size it is. Even if you are lucky, and you do find that you can get someone who will investigate and potentially prosecute logging theft for you, you find yourself facing what I would call a gate fee to get into the system. The first thing they do is to tell you, go get a survey of your land. You're the victim, get a survey. And I find this extremely ironic too, because let's say that I hire a logger to log my timber. Let's say that the logger strays over to my neighbor's timber, either because I gave him bad information, possibly deliberately, or because he just saw an opportunity and took it. The person who is told to get the survey is the innocent victim, the only person in this thing who is innocent and who's not making a dime from this transaction. Obviously, a very peculiar way to do things here. The next thing you will find is that you're told that you have to go hire a professional forester. These guys charge you maybe $450 a day to estimate your loss before they'll even start investigating for you. And the last thing is that you will be expected to pay the cost of the Commonwealth's witnesses if they decide to prosecute criminally. It's not the Commonwealth who pays those witnesses in many cases, but the victim who is told you're going to have to pay the expenses of the witnesses that I called to prosecute for the state of Kentucky. And if it were certainly a murder case, I don't think the victim's family would expect to have to pay for the Commonwealth's witnesses, or if it were a case of assault and battery, I very much doubt that the victim would have to pay for the witnesses. But in logging cases, if they do make it to court too many times, it's the victim who has to pay for the Commonwealth's witnesses. So what you decide at the end of this is, when you talk to these people, is you're out there all by yourself. You don't have any help, really, in this thing. So you either can quit right then, or you can follow what they all told you and file a civil case. And if you file a civil case, you have a new set of problems. First of all, you have, in addition to paying for the survey and the timber evaluation and the witnesses, you now have to pay a lawyer. And because we don't have much time here, for reasons I won't go into to save time, it is almost impossible to find a lawyer who will take a timber case on contingency. And then it's good reason. You can't blame them for that. They just won't do that. So you're facing $150, $250 an hour to pay for a lawyer. Secondly, your chances of recovery are absolutely almost nil. First of all, there's this concept called stump value. Chances are they're going to value your loss based on what they think the stump is, the tree, where it's cut. And stump value is usually 1/3 to 1/4 of what the logger or the thief can sell your tree for, your log for at the mill. So you're already behind the curve there. Okay. Secondly, you go to court and you get no damage probably will be counted except for clean water damage. In other words, if the logger left a mess that is going to get silt in the streams, okay, the court will count that because you have to remediate that to be clean water log. But the fact that he left head-high piles of debris that are real fire danger to you and that are very damaging to your land, that make it hard for you to get around, doesn't count usually. Recontouring your land doesn't count. Putting back the topsoil they pushed away doesn't count. So there are a whole raft of things that the owner suffers, the victim suffers, that are generally not even regarded in court. And the next thing is that you get low to non-existent awards even if you make it through the process. I know one gentleman whose expenses, lost timber, legal and everything, came to $70,000, excuse me. And the government did prosecute in that case and they settled, and his award was $9,000. So in his view, he's out $61,000. His land has been ruined, and there's nothing he can do about that. So what happens then, you think about those things, and most victims just are stopped dead right there. They can't get the law to act, they probably can't afford to act, and even if they did, they're not going to get anything back, and it just doesn't look like a good gamble to them even if they can afford it. And then there's the issue of stress. People have told me that going through a lawsuit is kind of equivalent to going through a course of chemotherapy. I mean, it's really hard on you. And so they look at that, and so they stop there. In fact, more accurately, most victims never even get that far because they know the situation in Kentucky. They know that these things occur that way, and so they take their own routes. I have a not too far away, several miles away neighbor in Letcher County who had some timber stolen. The guy came over from a neighbor's land and took some of his timber. He knows it was the guy. The guy even admitted it, but the guy basically says, you know, so what? So what are you going to do? And he looked at the fact that the law usually doesn't act and the civil cases are terribly expensive. And what he did was to get a big 4x4 piece of plywood and he put up a huge sign out by the state highway that said, so-and-so stole my timber. And in fact, it appeared in the Mountain Eagle a few years back because that was his way of making some kind of a protest for that. Another lady took a similar, although alternative path, Peggy Kramer actually tried to get the sheriff to act, and the sheriff refused to investigate. So she took out an ad, I believe it was Morgan County, in her local paper, and if you look in your package there, you'll see a copy of that ad that says, this guy stole my timber. Basically, may still be doing it, and all my neighbors, you better be watching out. And there's a copy of that. So usually, nothing happens when you have timber stolen from you. And one of the results of that is that nobody knows how much timber theft goes on in Kentucky. Most of the victims don't report it. Even if they do report it and you get into the system, Kentucky just doesn't keep statistics that way. You can count murders and you can look at the Kentucky State Statistics and you can find out how many murders there were. But you can't find out how many timber thefts there were even reported, because we just don't keep them that way. So that leaves victims kind of out on their own.
No, just to try to wrap up at our time, but and I had called you Nina earlier, and I apologize. But when I first talked to her on the phone, and she began to tell me this, I shared with her my family has an old homestead down toward Chavvy's, and Representative Steele's familiar with this. But the house had been there since Kentucky was Castle, Virginia, and the trees on the farm were old and beautiful. And we went down to check on the old home a couple of years ago, and all the trees were gone. And it wasn't so much the value of the trees as far as the cast, it was just an intangible value to us of how much they meant, and they were around the home. And of course, I'm sure the neighbors knew who did it. You couldn't remove trees that size without somebody knowing, but I never turned it in, and we never found out who did it, and everybody around there said they didn't see anything. And it's frustrating when you have something just stolen up your property and taken like that. And as you began to share your story with me, and we've talked to many others here that have as well, that there seems to be something that should be done. Kentucky needs to represent landowners much better than what I think we do